Here we go. Good morning, welcome to Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket, George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. It's 7:01. Wake up, yes, it's dark outside, but this is one of those shows that may kind of have a profound effect on you. I have a guest coming on the show today, Dr. Johnny Bowden. He wrote a book called, he's actually written 13 books. One of them is called The Most Effective Natural Cures on Earth. You can find them on Amazon or in bookstores. He's a PhD, so he's a research scientist and also a board-certified nutritionist. My co-host today, you haven't heard from him in a while, but I had him on anyway. We'd have to get him back in the station. Dr. Jeremy Webster, good morning.
Good morning.
What did you see about Dr. Bowden's information that made him stand out opposed to other guests we've had on when we talk about natural cures? I mean, when you say cures, which we're not supposed to say, you have to really watch your butt.
Right.
What stood out that makes you think,
Yeah, Dr. Bowden is very good at communicating. That's the first thing I want to say. I've listened to some of his online lectures before. I think he was on the Designs for Health clinical rounds, which has a lot of professionals on there from different aspects of the healthcare world, and he's very easy to understand. He's got a broad base of knowledge. He communicates it well. I keep going back to that.
Yeah.
I think your audience is going to like him just because he's going to be able to put it in simple terms that they can understand and make them feel like they're the expert now.
He'll answer some questions like, how does the conventional medical model fail our illness or fail us here in the United States when it comes to illness? How effective are natural medicines in treating common health problems? And one of the questions I'll ask him when we get into the meat of the show is, are you worried about the FDA, Big Pharma, others coming after you for some of the claims you're making? When you say cure, when you say treat, when you take away from their share, if you make a big enough impact, they're going to come knocking on your door. Even if you're really helping people and there's nothing wrong, they'll find something, right?
Right. It's this whole tap dancing that we have to do. I listened to Kevin Trudeau a while back. He was talking about scurvy. Scurvy is by definition absence of vitamin C, a deficiency in vitamin C. But if you say that vitamin C will cure scurvy, that by definition is saying that vitamin C is now a drug and a nutritionist isn't licensed to sell drugs. So you see how it's this paradox that we get ourselves into, so we have to be very careful with the wording that we use.
Right.
Even though we all know that technically it's very obvious that vitamin C is the cure for scurvy, you just really can't say that, and I just did.
Yeah, well, you said technically. That's where you covered your butt.
Right.
So there's that. All right, coming up next, we'll talk with Dr. Johnny Bowden. The name of his book is The Most Effective Natural Cures on Earth. I threw a little Italian in there. The Most Effective Natural Cures on Earth. It's 7:04 Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket.
Now for Dr.
712 Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. Co-hosting with me today, Dr. Jeremy Webster. Blast from the past. Guest on the show today is Dr. Johnny Bowden. You can check his website out at johnnybowden.com. I'll spell it JONNYBOWDEN.com. PhD, board certified nutritionist. Glad to have you on, Johnny. Good morning
Hi, George.
to you.
Nice to be here. Good morning to you.
Say hello to Dr. Webster.
Hi, Dr. Webster. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Bowden. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to
Dr.
you.
Bowden, Dr. Webster said he's heard some of your, webinars or webcasts,
Okay.
and he's listened to you, so he's familiar with you.
All right.
I'm kind of in left field. We were talking earlier about your book, or I think it's the latest book, called The Most Effective Natural Cures on Earth, and that title in itself is controversial because of the word cure, and then we go into effective. And then you raise the hair on the back of the necks of Big Pharma and the FDA. Let's piss them off more and talk about your idea of how the conventional medical model of illness is completely screwed up in America.
Well, I would agree with you about the title, and it was picked particularly for just that reason. There have been a couple of books on the market when I wrote mine that had a very conspiratorial kind of subtitle, what people don't want you to know, what the conspiracies don't want you to know. And we started the book with a very long essay about exactly what was implied by that title. And I made very clear that we're not talking cures in the sense that we're going to cure cancer with an herb, or we're going to have some special magical thing that nobody knows about that's going to cure heart disease. What we talked about instead was a definition of the treatment of disease in a way that mobilized all of the resources that we have in the body to fight off invaders, to heal itself, and to use as many natural, gentle substances that exist to start that as a course of action to help the course of disease. Not necessarily to replace conventional medicine, not to say that all of what conventional medicine has to offer is of no use, but to simply say that there are many forces that we have that we can marshal at our own with our own bodies, biochemicals that we make ourselves, metabolic processes can be helped by various nutrients and supplements and amino acids and phytochemicals, and to use these in a way that really unleashes their power to help us to heal.
One of the things that you mentioned just now was we're not saying that the natural cures are necessarily, that word stands out in my mind, to replace conventional medicine. Now let me back up before I make that point. The first part is most people are unaware that most medicines came from plants. Today we're making some things synthetically. So now we move forward. You said not necessarily to replace. I know you're covering your ass, but let's get real. We know for a fact, studies have shown, that certain natural remedies can take the place of certain medications. Why can I say that? I'm not a doctor. So I just know that through research. I know that from listening to people like you and Dr. Webster and other medical doctors that I've had on the show. And more importantly, through watching someone who was on a certain type of drug, which I won't mention now because that's getting a little too hairy, and taking a more natural stance and not having to be on the medical drug anymore or pharmaceutical anymore. So I will take that stance in that role and say, look, I understand what you're saying. I read into what you're saying, and I know there's something more powerful than that.
And maybe we need to get into, Dr. Bowden, what do you think is the appropriate use of...
Call me Johnny, by all means, please.
Oh, Johnny. Johnny, what do you think is the appropriate use of conventional medicine, and kind of compare that and contrast it with natural or alternative medicine?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Let me say this. I think that Western medicine, conventional medicine, is absolutely unparalleled at saving your life in an emergency. I always say, God forbid I get hit by a car, do not take me to the nearest herbalist, take me to the nearest best emergency room in the country, in my case Cedars-Sinai, whatever is your best emergency room, that's where I want to go if I need to be kept alive after an accident. That is not where I want to go, meaning conventional medicine. If I have a long-standing chronic disease, if I want prevention, if I want to never get to that disease state, or if I want to heal from a disease state that's going to take years and years and can possibly last the rest of my life, things like heart disease and high blood pressure and possibly liver disease, hepatitis C, there's many, many chronic diseases that conventional medicine is lousy at managing and preventing. It is wonderful at triage. It's exactly where I want to be in a life and death emergency, and that's where conventional medicine excels.
So what you're saying is acute medicine, trauma is beneficial. We've mentioned this many times on the radio or on this show before. Chronic medication does not add to our health. It detracts from our health, but it also can help people with their symptoms. So let's move forward with that while we're on that. Chronic medication, what kind of damage could chronic medication do? And just go over it briefly because I want to move forward. We've discussed this before on the air, but I want to hear it from your perspective.
What kind of damage can chronic medication do?
Yeah, well, we know it doesn't add to the body. It detracts from the body. It takes minerals from the body. It takes nutrients from the body. We know that when you're on 3 medications, you're going to be on a 4th one because of the other 3 that you're on. Elaborate on that.
Well, the thing is, when you have symptom treating, excuse me, when you have...
You need some Tums? You need what are they called? Vicks?
Yeah, right.
Vapor? Whatever?
When you have a kind of plug the hole kind of headset towards symptoms, you don't tend to look for systemic causes, for things that could maybe impact the body all the way through across all systems. We have this system in this country, and for better or for worse, of extreme specialization. The guy who knows how to sew your finger on doesn't necessarily know anything about your lungs. And the guy who knows how to set the bones and do orthopedic work doesn't really necessarily know anything about B12 metabolism. So you rarely have people who are generalists in the sense of looking systemically. How does the liver talk to the heart? How does the heart talk to the blood pressure? How does that talk to the stress hormones? And how do they in turn affect muscle breakdown? And how does that affect mood? And these things are all interrelated in one big internet. And what we have is a medicine of tremendous specialization in which the person giving the medicine for depression doesn't know anything about the person giving the medicine for blood pressure. And as you say, when you're on 3, you're going to be on a 4th for the side effects of the 3. So this is not a kind of systemic functional approach. And if you will, to use that term again, natural medicine, or medicine that complements that kind of emergency medicine, does look at the whole body and the whole system and to see how these things might interact and talk to each other and might be beneficial, throughout the system. Let me give you an example. Anti-inflammatories. Foods that are anti-inflammatory, supplements that are anti-inflammatories, omega-3 is the most anti-inflammatory substance on the planet. These things work systemically. They don't just work in the liver. They don't just work in the brain. They don't just work in the heart. They work throughout. And this kind of treatment is what I'm talking about marshaling when we talk about really healing illness.
And I think the other important thing that we have to consider when we compare and contrast the traditional medical model is that it doesn't get to the underlying cause of the problem. You just mentioned inflammation. We know that a deficiency in an essential fatty acid like EPA or DHA or a deficiency in vitamin D alone can cause inflammation. So if you jump right to the symptom of pain, what you're doing is you're basically adding another substance, a toxic substance that can do harm, and you're also ignoring the underlying cause. You're not addressing the underlying cause of a deficiency in vitamin D. So that's still there along with all the other problems that a deficiency in vitamin D could cause, such as osteoporosis or immune issues, autoimmunity, cancer risk. All those things are still there, and all you've done is basically mask the symptom.
Johnny, do you know Dr. John Hachey?
I do not.
He said something, and I continue to quote him even off the air, and it's profound, and I'm sure you'll agree with it. He said, "George, there are no diseases, only inflammation." And I'd like to run through really fast causes of inflammation that become chronic that most people are unaware of. I've done this many times before, but I don't know how many people really appreciate it. So this morning you wake up, you stub your toe on the bed. You get pissed because you didn't have a good night's sleep, so now you're moody throughout the day. You almost have a car accident. You're worried about your finances. You ate fried food. You're deficient in certain nutrients, and you have, for the day anyway, chronic inflammation. Now the next day comes, you're still deficient in certain nutrients. You're not taking your omegas, or you're not taking the right ones. They're high in mercury. Now you've got you just exercised. You didn't exercise the right way. You went for a 5 or a 10-mile run. So you cause more inflammation because of working against the fight or flight system. And I don't think people appreciate that when you have all of this inflammation, that you're attracting disease and the now quote-unquote need for being on medications because of your joint pain, your ass pain, your headache, and all these other things. Please expand upon the importance of lowering inflammation and how, I guess, some of the symptoms of someone who's got chronic inflammation, what needs to be done about it right away.
Well, you bring up such brilliant points that I don't even know where to really start with this. But let me expound a little bit on something you brought up, which is the stubbing of the toe. Inflammation comes in 2 flavors, George, as I know that you know very well. The first one we're all familiar with. That's the stubbing your toe. That's the guys I play with on the tennis court who've got knee injuries and back injuries, and you feel the throbbing. You can almost see the redness in it, and the swelling, or you get a splinter or you get an abscess in the tooth, and your tooth swells up, or you get an abscess on your skin. We all know what that is. That's acute inflammation. That hurts a lot, but it doesn't kill. the kind of inflammation you've just been talking about, the kind I talk about in my book, the kind I talk about in my forthcoming book on cholesterol, that inflammation flies beneath the radar. It doesn't have symptoms. It's exactly like high blood pressure. Sometimes the first symptom, it's sorry to say, of high blood pressure is you drop dead of a heart attack. Very often that's the first symptom of heart disease. Diabetes doesn't really have any symptoms. 1/3 of the people who have diabetes in this country are walking around undiagnosed. So chronic inflammation is this kind of injury that flies beneath the radar of pain. It happens in the vascular system. It happens in the brain. It happens in the joints. It's a kind of inflammation that is insidious because you don't really know it's there, but you can assume that if you're breathing, you've got it. And inflammation, for example, in the vascular system is what causes heart disease. Not cholesterol. It's never been cholesterol. It's a complete myth and a complete lie that it's cholesterol. It's inflammation. It starts an injury, which then gets patched up the best the body knows how to do it. Some cholesterol goes in there, some other substances go in there, and that inflammation can turn into plaque, and then that can turn, of course, into a clot, and all the rest of the things that we know that happen in heart disease. When you do autopsies on the brains of people with Alzheimer's, you find what? Inflammation and plaque and tangles. Inflammation is a part, this kind of chronic inflammation that we're talking about is a part of every degenerative disease known to man. I talk about it in the book. I've talked about it in other books. Everybody's talked about it in the complementary side of medicine. Your friend who told you that all disease is inflammation is talking about that. So that's the inflammation we should be looking at.
All right, Dr. Bowden, we've got to go to a break, but I'd like to, and you can expand upon this when we get back if you'd like, but here's a question that's a profound one, and I know you can handle it well. What are the most powerful plant medicines in the world, and can we replace one or more, let me change that, what are the most powerful plant natural cures, if you will, in the world that can replace one or more medicines naturally? And if this is true, what are the medications? We'll find out with Dr. Johnny Bowden coming up next. 726 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. 734 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. Co-host with me today is Dr. Jeremy Webster. You've heard him before. Want to give him a call just because? 972-735-0707. We're going to have Dr. Webster on again next week. Real fast, what are we talking about with B vitamins?
We're going to talk about everything that B vitamins do. Energy production, relaxation, sleep,
and the
depression,
symptoms
mood.
of people who are deficient in B vitamins, and how just about everybody listening will be deficient in at least one B vitamin, correct?
What type of foods? Yeah, what type of foods we can get
Because
it
that's
from.
a stat that came out, what, last year?
Probably so.
Yeah. All right, right now we have Dr. Johnny Bowden on the show. You can go to his website, JONNYBOWDEN, JohnnyBowden.com. His book we're discussing today, The Most Effective Natural Cures on Earth. We haven't talked about those yet, and we're about to get into it now, the meat of the show. Dr. Bowden, I left you with this question. What are the most powerful plant substances in the world that can replace one or more medications? And I know I'm being touchy here, but doing it naturally. And if this can be done, what are the medications?
Well, I think you might have me up against the wall on that one.
Well, change the lingo and answer the question the best you can.
Well, let's take something as simple as thinning the blood. That's a very big one. Coumadin is rat poison is what they basically give for this, and then they come up with all kinds of cockamamie things about how you can't have any vitamin K because it'll interfere with the coumadin. This is not one of our most wonderful medicines. You can thin the blood and prevent. And remember, again, both you and I are very cautious to say, don't get off your Coumadin, folks, and run and start taking this stuff. But there are things in the natural world, if you will, and I mean that includes vitamins, which aren't, they don't grow on trees. There's something synthetic about, putting things into a capsule, but there's certainly much more natural to the human body. But something like, for example, nattokinase, which is a substance found in fermented soybeans, it does just as good a job of preventing stroke and thinning the blood and preventing clotting, and we know exactly the mechanisms by which it works, and it's a very effective mechanism for accomplishing much of what certain medicines, like, say, for example, Coumadin, would accomplish. Things that are anti-inflammatory, like aspirins, which baby aspirin. That's kind of standard medical advice for cardiovascular disease prevention and strokes. To take a baby aspirin every day. But omega-3s do this stuff just as well, and they do it without any side effects, and they do it with actually beneficial effects around the rest of the system, as well as the preventive effects it has.
Dr. Bono, what about boswellia?
It's a wonderful anti-inflammatory herb, one of the strongest anti-inflammatory herbs on the planet, and another one that I would say is pretty close to you never want to call these things miracle cures, but they're so strong. There's strong weapons in the arsenal of staying healthy. How's that? Curcumin. That's extracted from the turmeric plant, which I'm sure you've all talked about. It's the stuff that makes Indian food yellow, the stuff that makes curries yellow. That plant has got wonderful active ingredients in it called curcuminoids, and they're extracted and they're made into a supplement called curcumin, and that is just magnificent, not only for pain, not only for reduction of inflammation, but it turns on genes that are involved with the immune system. There are about 16 different pathways that it affects in a positive way. It's extremely good for the liver, so it's good for detoxification and for helping the liver do its job of getting rid of things that don't belong in your body. So things like this, just have multiple effects. Omega-3s are probably at the top of the list. They're not only anti-inflammatory, they lower blood pressure, they lower triglycerides, they improve mood, they're used for depression. I mean, there's so many things that they do. And why do they do so many things for so many systems? Is because they help the cells talk to each other.
Yeah.
And when you have communication between the cells, all these things are affected in a good way.
Just so people don't think you're a wacko, give us
I know.
references to some of the supplements or the studies that you just discussed. If you could just give us references quickly.
Well, I'm not sure, but when I write my books and I talk about references, I am talking about specific chapter and verse in a given journal. The Journal of the American Medical Association, 2001, Volume 9. I don't have that. I'm doing a morning interview from my office.
Well, do you have it in your book, Dr. Bowden?
Of course. I put references for studies in every single book. Our current book, which is going to be coming out in November, called The Great Cholesterol Myth, you can believe there are probably about 50 to 70 references in every chapter, because we take apart this cholesterol myth and chop it up into all kinds of pieces. And believe me, we know we're going to be attacked, and we have referenced every single statement with a journal article, a peer review article, or a secondary source that is extremely respected. So yes, I know about references, but unfortunately I don't carry them around in my head.
No, that's totally fine. If they're in your book, that's fantastic. Go ahead, Dr. Webster.
Hey, Johnny. This is great, by the way. I want to go back a little bit to what you said before the break. You were talking about the difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation, how when you stub your toe or you injure yourself, that inflammation is a good thing. Talk a little bit about curcumin and how it affects inflammation and how it affects chronic inflammation specifically. Does it affect just chronic inflammation, or does it reduce your ability to have that good, positive, acute cascade of inflammation?
And keep it kind of short if you can.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you in a word, with my experience, the proper form of curcumin, when it's really well absorbed, and it's not a well absorbed plant chemical, it really, some curcumins on the market are much better than others, but the ones I've seen that are well absorbed, like mixed with boswellia, and really in a formula that are incredibly effective for immediate pain. In fact, there's one on them. I don't know if you're into mentioning brands. I won't even do it, but there's one that literally says that on the label: "Stop pain now."
You can mention the brand. Go ahead.
Well, the one I like is Terry Naturally, and you can get it in health food stores, and it's the best curcumin I've ever seen. And that, for example, is useful for immediate pain, but it's been useful for so much more behind-the-scenes thing. With chronic. So your answer is yes, it does work for acute inflammation as well as all the stuff it does, kind of be under the hood.
Talk about cocoa.
Well, cocoa is another one of those natural substances that seems to have tremendous benefits, particularly in cardiovascular disease. The flavonols, which are a type of plant chemicals that are found in cocoa, have been found to lower blood pressure. And the way this was all discovered was there's a group of people, of the Kuna people off the Panama Islands, who have traditionally for generations just they don't have a rise in blood pressure when they get older, and nobody really knows why, and they've been studied, and the one thing that seemed to stand out in their diet was that they drink about 5 glasses a day of this cocoa-infused beverage with all these flavanols in it, and further study has shown over the years, there's just one cardiovascular benefit after another over these cocoa flavanols. So there's another terrific substance that, can be certainly helpful in things like blood pressure lowering, longevity, and all the other things that cocoa's been found to be associated with.
Good.
So what do we need to do? Eat some Hershey's Kisses every day, or what's the best form?
Because all you're going to do is make the fat people justified. Okay, well, he said.
No, as a matter of fact, just this, it was either this week or last, another study came out with a researcher who I have the greatest respect for, Beatrice Golem out here in California, did a study that showed that actually people who eat dark chocolate, and I'll make a clarity about that. We're not talking milk chocolate bars. We're not talking the 7-Eleven. We're talking, high cocoa dark chocolate bars. The people who eat the most chocolate actually are the skinniest. Now, that's not a perfect relationship. The more chocolate you eat, the skinnier you get. But it was found that people who incorporate small amounts of dark chocolate in their diet on a regular daily basis actually turn out to have lower BMIs than people who don't. So
I don't like dark chocolate at all. I just won't eat it. Seriously, I don't care if it's got health benefits or not. I will not eat dark chocolate. I think it's nasty.
Well, understand, that, and there are actually cocoa flavanols are sold in supplement form. There's one that that I like a lot. That's made Cocoa Well. You can get it anywhere. Cocoa flavanols concentrated in the form, and you can take. If you don't like dark chocolate, it's not to everyone's taste. You only have to eat about a square or 2 a day to get these benefits. You don't have to scarf down bars of it. But many people don't like the taste. It's not as sweet. It's not as addictive. It's it's a different kind of food. The cocoa flavanols are a wonderful substitute.
So, Johnny Bowden, you brought up weight loss, so I'm going to go there. With your permission, you have the 7 lies that you've been told that affect your weight and make you fat and sick on your website. If I can talk about one of those right now.
Do it fast.
Calories in versus calories out. It's kind of a myth that doesn't really hold much weight, does it?
Well, here's the thing with it. It's one of these things, I call it a donut truth. There's something there around the edges, but you could drive a Mack truck through the hole in the middle of that particular factoid. So yeah, calories are not irrelevant, but they're so far from the whole picture. George, when you eat food, you induce a hormonal reaction in your body. Food is message, and the message is sent by hormones. So you have hormones that tell the body to store fat more efficiently. You have hormones that tell the body to break down muscle. You have hormones that send a signal. There are hormones that have millions of different messages. Testosterone says build up muscle and cut the fat, and cortisol says break down some muscle and store it around the abdominal area. And they're all very specific reasons. And when you eat food like that, those hormones are what are driving your fat storage or your fat loss. And it is not just the calories, it's what the calories are composed of. Much like we used to just have cholesterol, now we have different types of cholesterol, so we know that they act differently in the body. It's the same thing with calories. If you ate 1,000 calories of, for example,
pasta versus 1,000 calories of...
Perfect example. Yeah. 1,000 calories of raw fish in a sushi restaurant. The hormonal reaction in the body, in terms of whether it favored fat storage or not, would be vastly different even though the calories were the same. So that is one of the myths that we really do struggle with, because people just look at the calories and say, hey, this is low fat, hey, this has less calories, and they don't think about the hormonal cascade that is set in motion by that food, and that actually has more of an effect on whether they store fat than the calories do.
That's one of the things I've mentioned before about this study being so off. And people I love to hate, Dr. Bowden, you don't have to agree with me, although I think you might not use the word hate.
I'm beginning to think I might.
Well, you might not use the word hate, but registered dietitians, they suck.
I have written, one of my first manuscripts.
He's stumbling.
I refer to the American type. I start to sputter when the names come up. I use hate. I called them the Taliban of nutrition in one of my manuscripts, and of course the editor rejected it because it was a little bit of a loaded term. But the American Dietetic Association, I actually wrote an article on this which was censored on the Huffington Post, saying that the American Dietetic Association is one of the most destructive organizations in the country if you're looking to be healthy and if you're looking to get good information about nutrition. They are the handmaidens to the American Medical Association. If you read the history of the ADA, how they were developed, they were literally developed in a culture in which you worshiped the doctor. You gave the doctor your chair in the hospital cafeteria. If you were a nurse, you stood up and gave it to the doctor. Whatever the doctor said went. Doctors notoriously have no training in nutrition whatsoever.
So that's why, we've got to go, Dr. Bowden, but that's why it's important to know the difference between traditional or conventional medical doctor, a medical doctor who has nutritional information today that sets him or her apart, like other doctors I've had on the show. The latest chiropractor, like Dr. Webster in the studio with me, the latest nutritionist, and if they're board certified, like both of you are, and so on. So coming up next, here's what I'd like you to do, last segment of the show. Think of as many takeaway thoughts as possible for people listening. They're in their car, they're in the gym, they're about to go to the gym or work out, and they want a takeaway today. You don't have to have much explanation, but as many takeaways as you can possibly give somebody to improve their health and maybe even something to do with fat loss. Dr. Johnny Bowden coming up next, 747, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. 755, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. George the John Train Station Fitness Show. Dr. Webster co-hosting with me today, and on the phone is Dr. Johnny Bowden. You can go to his website, JONNYBOWDEN.com. I highly recommend it. Dr. Bowden, when does your book come out about cholesterol myth?
November 1st, and it's on pre-order at Amazon even right now. But yes, it comes out, hits the stands actually on November 1st.
Give us the title again.
The Great Cholesterol Myth, Why Cholesterol Doesn't Cause Heart Disease and the Statin-Free Plan That Will.
My good friend Tom wrote me a text just now, said he's interested, he said, interesting, his cardiologist is trying to force Lipitor on him. The Pfizer patent ran out and people, it's like a race for the generics to jump in on the billions of dollars.
Don't get me started.
I know, don't get any of us started. We've talked about cholesterol thousands of times on this show. And,
have you really? Oh, good.
No, we, you know what? I welcome it again in the future with you. But anyway, I'd love for people to buy that because, like you said, you've got a lot of references. I'm talking fast now because here's what I'd like to do.
Sure.
Give as many bullet point facts, takeaway messages, tips, anything you possibly can for the next 3.5 minutes. And look at your clock. It's 7:56 right now, okay?
Ready to go.
Go.
I always start with food. Let's go with the biggest, the big guns. Get these foods into your diet as much as possible. Wild salmon, grass-fed beef, eggs, vegetables, fruits, garlic, dark chocolate, red wine, cruciferous vegetables, green tea, and pomegranate juice.
Okay, hold on. Tell people what cruciferous vegetables are.
Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, the chewy, crunchy things, Brussels sprouts, broccoli is probably the best example, cabbage, kale, spinach, any of those.
Okay, more takeaway messages. What could someone do today to change their health? Or even fat loss?
For fat loss, the first thing to do, and the second thing to do, and the third thing to do is to cut the carbs. Carbs are what drive weight gain, and they do it in a variety of ways. You told me to get to the cut to the chase fast. So bring them down by at least a third, if not a half. Up your protein. Eat protein at every meal. Try to build your meals around what I call the Johnny Bowden 4 food groups, which is food you could have hunted, fished, gathered, or plucked. If it has a barcode, stay away from it. Keep it protein-heavy meals. Do not fear fat. Do not do a low-fat version of a high-protein diet. Cut the carbs. Cut the pasta, the rice, the breads, the cereals, and all the stuff you've been told you need for fiber. It's all BS. Cut that stuff out. Up your protein and fat. You will lose weight.
And Johnny, don't you find out when you incorporate a diet that's heavy in the cruciferous vegetables, good fats, and high in protein, that the carbohydrate cravings tend to melt away?
Absolutely. These foods have their own bet you can't eat just one built right into them. The processed foods are engineered this way. David Kessler's book, The End of Overeating, the former FDA commissioner, details brilliantly how the food industry literally engineers these products to hit every note in the brain that spells, that hits the circuits that say, give me more, give me more, give me more. They layer the salt and the fat and the sugar in just the right proportions. So yes, these foods create their own cravings. When you cut them out, guess what? You don't eat as much.
That's why the fast food chains, many years ago, has studied this stuff, and they got it right. They know what's going to make you continually crave more of the bad foods.
You absolutely bet you do. And one of the most important books, not my own, I wish it were, the last couple of years, is a book called Wheat Belly, where cardiologist William Davis will detail in full exactly what wheat does to your belly and why.
I talked to him on the phone, and he said, George, I am inundated with people who want to talk about my book. He said, but I'm also a practicing doctor, a cardiologist, and I don't have time to do it. He said, you can go to my website, and I believe it's wheatbelly.com. Is that right, Dr. Bowden?
I'm pretty sure it is, and Dr. Davis is going to be blurbing my cholesterol book, and I'm so honored by that because we actually started the book with a quote from him, and it's maybe a good place to end the show. Never underestimate the power of the conventional, particularly in medicine.
Exactly.
One of my favorite quotes.
That is a good one because people think they need wheat. Let me have wheat over white, so it's total bull. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for being on the show. I want to have you on again. You're a fantastic guest. You sound like Woody Allen is one of the people who emailed us. You like that? You never got that compliment before.
No.
So I guess if it's a compliment, you sound fine.
I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in New York, in Manhattan.
Well, there you go. You're definitely Woody Allen's cousin then. Anyway, thank you for being on the show. I want to have you on the show again, especially when your next book comes out, Dr. Bowden. Also, Dr. Webster, for coming on.